Hello BookTube, I'm Jonathan and welcome to Words in Time. Now in today's video, not only am I going to be reviewing CIBOLA Burn, the fourth book of the Expanse, I'm also going to be debuting a quick new segment that I'm calling the Sci-Fi Quiz of the Day. So stick around for that later in the video. But first, what is the premise for CIBOLA Burn? Well, after the events of Book 3, a gate has been opened to new inhabitable planets. And this leads to a dispute over one planet in particular between Belter settlers that have arrived there first and an Earth corporation that has legal claims to that planet. Now, as always, Holden and the crew of the Rocinante find themselves in the middle of this conflict, and they have to navigate the dangers of both factions as well as the planet itself. So keeping things spoiler-free, I wanted to start with the POVs. As usual for an Expanse book, CIBOLA Burn follows several different points of view, one of which is our good old friend Holden. Now, Holden in this book often faces tough decisions where he has to choose between what he thinks is right, what he thinks is the best ethical or moral decision, alongside what he thinks has a best chance of keeping the peace. Now, while doing so, he's constantly facing opposition, and there's one antagonist in particular that he frequently comes head-to-head with. Now, in terms of his own storyline, his own goals, his own motivations, I'm not sure if this is the book with the most interesting Holden storyline, but we do get a few developments that follow up on some threads that were laid down in some earlier Expanse books, which is pretty interesting and kind of helps get you invested from book to book rather than everything just being self-contained within book 4. So up next we have Barcia, and Barcia is actually a character that appeared in an earlier book, Caliban's War, but this is his first time getting a POV in the series. Now, Barcia is a Belter, and he is living on the planet called Ilis, or New Terra, depending on who you ask, and he is connected to a resistance group that is prepared to go to some fairly extreme lengths in order to defend their settlement. And throughout the book, Barcia has to make decisions, decide how far he is willing to go in order to do what is right, what is best for his family and for the settlement. Now, I like the position that the writers placed this character in. I was invested in his character and his storyline, but the themes it tackles, I don't think they went too deep with them. I don't think it really unraveled or revealed any layers that it didn't really do so in the first half of the book. And the character development that we got throughout the second half of the book was pretty much what I expected from fairly early on in the story. Moving on to the third POV, we have Havelock. And Havelock is another character that we have seen before, going all the way back to Leviathan Wakes, but again, this is his first time getting a POV, and I like that. I like that different things are coming together, characters, storylines are starting to weave together throughout the Expanse world the further we get into the series. So, Havelock works as part of a security detail for the Earth Corporation, RCE. And in some ways, Havelock's character kind of mirrors that of Barcia's. So, following his storyline, we get questions to do with doing the right thing versus justifying what the right thing is, or questioning what actions are made independently versus those of just being a cog in a machine. Initially, I wasn't super invested in Havelock's character. I didn't find him overly interesting, but as the story developed, I did actually become a little bit more intrigued and entertained by Havelock towards the end of the book. And lastly, we have Elvie. She is a scientist for the RCE. And to be honest, this was probably my least favorite of the POVs. Elvie is predominantly focused on researching the new planet, and some of the science that she encounters is actually pretty interesting and relevant to the plot. But I found that she herself as a character didn't have too many layers. There weren't too many other threads or storylines that I particularly cared about. She does have a romantic interest come up, but that was never something that I was particularly invested in the outcome of. Now, in between these POVs, we do have some short interludes, which I won't say much about other than if you like mumbo jumbo, these interludes could be for you. Now, just quickly on some of the other characters, in particularly the crew of the Rocinante, I would say that Naomi had some good moments in this book. We did get to learn a little bit more about Alex. He made me laugh quite a few times. And Amos, they set up such a good storyline for Amos that I thought was going to build to something really, really cool, and it didn't quite play out the way that I hoped it would. Now, speaking broadly about the plot, something I think The Expanse does well is create interesting politics and power dynamics between the factions of Earth, Mars, Belters, and the OPA. And I really like the setup for this book, and I think the authors did too, because they kind of went all in on this one storyline. And by that, what I mean is, The Expanse usually has several different and separate storylines that tend to converge later on in the story. Whereas this time around, in Cibola Burn, each of the main POVs are all pretty closely connected to that main central conflict. So I think if you enjoy that initial conflict, there's going to be a decent amount of this book that you're probably going to enjoy. If you're not so interested in that main conflict, I think it might be a bit more of a struggle because of the amount of time devoted to it. However, it does introduce some new elements, take a few different turns around halfway through. So if you're not loving it at the start, don't worry, not all hope is lost for your enjoyment of Cibola Burn. I also enjoyed the pacing of the book. I thought it did a good job of continually upping the stakes and building towards some exciting scenes. However, there were a couple of things that fell flat for me. There were two storylines in particular that I felt were a little bit anticlimactic. The first was the conflict with the main antagonist. For me, The Expanse so far has not really created an iconic villain, but I thought there was the potential for that to happen in Cibola Burn. We have a character that has a very specific worldview, and to me, really felt like a threat, really felt like a danger to the other people involved. But the way that played out, to me, was not so much an explosion or dramatic conclusion as it somewhat petered out. I'll be interested to get your guys' take on that one. The second one is what I mentioned in my previous review of Abaddon's Gate was the ambitious sci-fi concepts that are introduced in that book. Now, luckily, we do get a return of those, so I was interested to see where they would go in Cibola Burn, but I think the way that those were concluded and explored were not really as creative or as exciting as they were done in Book 3. So overall, what were my thoughts on Cibola Burn? Well, I think that Cibola Burn was a good outline for a book. And what I mean by that is, I think some things were set up really well. I think it had some really interesting ideas, and it hit some nice beats along the way. But in between those moments, I think it was somewhat let down by the execution. I think there could have been some slightly more clever or unexpected ways to resolve what was set up in the first half of the book. However, having said that, I did read this very quickly, so there was clearly something that I was enjoying about the book. For a score for Cibola Burn, I'm going to have to give it a 7 out of 10. I liked it, it definitely had its moments. It just wasn't quite what I thought it could be about halfway through, and didn't quite live up to some of the other Expanse books, particularly Leviathan Wakes. The first book is still my favorite so far. So that brings us to the big question of, will I continue the series? Well, if I had been told that Cibola Burn was the best book in the series, then I'll be a little bit wary about continuing, because while I enjoyed it, there are probably other books on my TBR that I might enjoy reading even more. However, it does seem that this is generally considered to be a lower tier Expanse book, so if the other books are better than this one, I'm fairly confident I'm going to enjoy the rest of the series. Especially the next one, Nemesis Games, which seems to be quite highly regarded, so I'm excited to read that one next, especially because some of the hints that we got in this one. A couple characters that I might like reading about, I think could be in Nemesis Games. We'll find out soon. So there's the review, but before you go, here is the sci-fi quiz of the day. It's pretty simple, one question. If you win, you get to brag in the comments. Maybe keep a running tally of your score for these quizzes. And if you lose, maybe consider subscribing. More sci-fi content can only help your sci-fi trivia. So, first question, fairly easy one. What is the third book in the Enders Saga? we have Ender's Game, Speaker for the Dead, then Xenocide. So let me know if you got that one. Let me know if you're enjoying the sci-fi quiz of the day, and hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to like and subscribe, because as always, there's more sci-fi content coming soon.